there was a guy everyone trusted, not because he was honest, because he knew exactly how to look honest. He smiled at the right moments, remembered birthdays, listened carefully when people spoke. He had this calm, reassuring voice that made you feel seen. Like out of everyone in the room, he understood you. And that was the first trap, because the most dangerous manipulators are never loud villains. They are emotional architects. They study people the way predators study movement in tall grass. And this story begins with one of them. His name was Adrian. At first, Adrian looked like the kind of friend people prayed for. He would show up during breakups, offer rides home at 2 a.m., sit beside you during your worst moments, and say exactly what your broken mind needed to hear. You deserve better. I'm here for you. You can trust me. And slowly, people did. Not all at once. That's never how manipulation works. Manipulation is patient. It enters your life disguised as comfort. And Adrian understood something terrifying about human psychology. People don't trust perfection. They trust familiarity. So he made himself familiar to everyone. To Marcus, he became the loyal gym partner. To Nina, the emotionally intelligent listener. To Daniel, the business-minded brother who wanted everyone to win. Every friendship was customized. Every personality studied. Every weakness quietly cataloged. And nobody noticed, because Adrian never took too much at first. Just tiny things. A favor here, a secret there, a little emotional dependency. Enough to build invisible strings. The strange part, most manipulators don't think they're evil. They think they're surviving. That's what makes them dangerous. Adrian grew up in chaos. A father who disappeared. A mother who weaponized guilt like a knife. Love in his childhood always came with conditions. Attention had to be earned. Safety had to be negotiated. So he learned early that emotions were currencies and people were systems. By the time he became an adult, he could read insecurity faster than most people read facial expressions. He knew who needed validation, who feared abandonment, who secretly wanted approval. And once he identified the hunger inside someone, he fed it carefully. Not enough to heal them, just enough to make them dependent on him. That's the thing about manipulative people. They don't always destroy you directly. Sometimes they make you slowly abandon yourself. At first, Adrian's friends felt lucky to know him. Then, without realizing it, they started orbiting him emotionally. Plans revolved around him. Conflicts passed through him. Secrets ended with him. He became the emotional center of the group. And emotionally centralized groups are easy to control. Psychologists call this triangulation. A manipulator positions themselves between people, so they become the gatekeeper of trust, information, and emotional security. Adrian mastered it. If Marcus had an issue with Daniel, Adrian would help mediate. If Nina felt insecure, Adrian would reassure her privately, while subtly deepening her dependence on his approval. He made people feel emotionally safe, while quietly isolating them from one another. Not physically, psychologically. That distinction matters, because the most effective manipulators don't imprison your body. They imprison your perception. And perception is fragile, especially when loneliness is involved. One night, the entire friend group gathered at a rooftop party. Music pulsed through the air. City lights blurred beneath drifting cigarette smoke. Laughter bounced off glass tables. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, Adrian moved like a conductor. A compliment here, a joke there, a reassuring touch on someone's shoulder. Everyone felt better after talking to him. That's why nobody noticed what he was really doing. He was collecting emotional leverage. Every conversation became data. Every insecurity became future ammunition. Marcus confessed his fear of failure. Nina admitted she worried nobody genuinely loved her. Daniel revealed financial stress. Adrian listened carefully, not compassionately, carefully, because manipulators understand something most people don't. Information creates power, and emotional information creates control. Weeks later, the fractures began. Small misunderstandings. Marcus suddenly felt Daniel was becoming distant. Nina thought the others secretly excluded her. Tiny tensions spread through the group like cracks beneath ice. And somehow, Adrian always appeared during the aftermath. Sympathetic, supportive, necessary. You know, I didn't want to say this. That sentence destroyed more relationships than people realize, because manipulators rarely attack directly. They imply, suggest, plant seeds. Human beings are storytelling creatures. Give someone enough emotional suspicion, and their brain will finish the narrative for you. Adrian knew that, so he never lied outright if he could avoid it. He preferred distortion, selective truth, emotional framing, because technically, he could always deny responsibility later. That's the genius of psychological manipulators. They create damage without leaving fingerprints. Months passed. The group grew emotionally exhausted. Nobody understood why things felt different, but everyone felt it. The warmth was gone. Trust became fragile. Conversations felt calculated. And slowly, people became more emotionally dependent on Adrian because he positioned himself as the only stable person left. The fireman who secretly started the fire. That's manipulation at its highest form, creating the wound and selling yourself as the cure. But eventually, every manipulator makes one mistake. They become greedy. Adrian started enjoying the control too much. What began as survival evolved into addiction, because power over people is intoxicating, especially for someone who once felt powerless. One evening, Nina discovered something strange. A message, then another, and another. Screenshots, conversations that didn't align. Adrian had been telling completely different stories to different people. To Marcus, he implied Nina talked behind his back. To Nina, he suggested Daniel found her emotionally unstable. To Daniel, he hinted Marcus envied his success. Each lie individually small, together catastrophic, and suddenly the entire psychological architecture collapsed. Not immediately. That's the scary part. Even confronted with evidence, people struggled to believe it, because manipulative individuals don't just control information. They control identity. Adrian wasn't just their friend. He had become part of how they emotionally understood reality. Accepting the truth meant admitting they had trusted someone dangerous, and humans resist that realization violently. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. When reality threatens our self-image, the brain fights to preserve the illusion. So some defended Adrian, others blamed themselves. A few froze entirely, but the illusion couldn't survive forever. Eventually, the group confronted him, and what happened next revealed the darkest truth about manipulators. Adrian never apologized. Not really. Instead, he reframed everything. You're misunderstanding me. I was only trying to help. You're all overreacting. Classic gaslighting. Another psychological weapon. Gaslighting works because memory is emotional. The more emotionally destabilized you become, the more uncertain your perception feels. And uncertainty creates dependence. But this time, something changed. Nobody looked convinced anymore. For the first time in years, Adrian lost control of the room. And you could see it, just for a second, a flicker behind his eyes. Panic, because beneath every manipulator is usually the same terrified person. Someone who believes control is the only thing preventing abandonment. That's the tragedy. Manipulative people often create the exact loneliness they fear most. Adrian spent years engineering emotional dependence because he was terrified people would leave if they saw the real him. And eventually, they left because of what he became. One by one, the group disappeared. Messages stopped. Invitations ended. Silence replaced proximity. And Adrian found himself in the exact situation he spent his entire life trying to avoid. Alone. But here, where the story becomes uncomfortable, because most people listening want this to end with justice. Villains exposed, victims healed, truth victorious. Real life rarely works that cleanly. Some manipulators never change. Others do. But change only begins when control stops working. And for the first time, Adrian had nobody left to manipulate. No emotional mirrors. No audience. No leverage. Just himself. Weeks later, Marcus ran into him accidentally at a coffee shop, and Adrian looked smaller. Not physically, psychologically, like a man exhausted from performing. They spoke briefly. No anger, No dramatic confrontation, just awkward humanity. And before Marcus left, Adrian said something strange. "You know what the worst part is?" Marcus didn't answer. Adrian stared into his untouched coffee. "I don't think I know how to be close to people without controlling them." That sentence lingered long after the conversation ended, because that's the horrifying truth beneath many manipulative personalities. Some people were never taught love without strategy, never taught connection without fear, never taught vulnerability without consequences. So they learned performance instead of intimacy, control instead of trust, manipulation instead of honesty, and eventually they become emotional illusionists, shaping reality around themselves because authentic connection feels too dangerous. But there's another lesson hidden inside this story, one that matters even more. Manipulators only succeed where self-awareness is absent. The people Adrian controlled were not stupid. They were human. Humans crave belonging, validation, understanding, and when those needs go unconscious, they become vulnerabilities others can exploit. That's why emotional intelligence matters, not as a trendy phrase, as psychological armor, because the moment you understand your own insecurities, you become harder to manipulate through them. The moment you stop needing constant external validation, emotional predators lose leverage. And the moment you learn to tolerate loneliness, desperate attachments lose their power. That's the paradox. The people hardest to manipulate are usually the ones most comfortable being alone. Not because they hate people, because they no longer fear losing them. And fear is the currency manipulators trade in. Maybe you've known someone like Adrian. Maybe you've been controlled by someone who disguised manipulation as care. Or maybe, uncomfortably, you've recognized parts of yourself in him. Most people have, because manipulation exists on a spectrum. Tiny performances, hidden intentions, emotional games. Almost everyone manipulates sometimes, but unchecked insecurity turns occasional manipulation into identity, and identity into destruction. In the end, the most chilling thing about manipulators isn't that they deceive others. It's that many eventually lose the ability to distinguish performance from self. They spend so long becoming who people need them to be. They forget who they actually are. And somewhere out there tonight, someone is still sitting in a room full of friends, smiling warmly, listening carefully, memorizing insecurities behind kind eyes. Not because they love people, because they fear being abandoned by them. And sometimes, those are the same people